Hello and welcome to this video, which is a bit of a break from the norm. So heads up, this is about having a remote teaching setup. So obviously for the last year or so, a lot of people have been working under this kind of condition, and it's probably not going to go away for a while yet, particularly for, different parts of the world. We're all handling this in different ways. In addition, I think it might be something that's going to stick to a degree. So I thought I'd go through my setup, which I use for teaching guitar remotely, because I've had a few people ask about the way that I'm doing it, because I know quite a few people who are instrumental teachers, etc., and maybe they are just trying to struggle through with just a straight Zoom connection, Teams, etc. I've probably predictably gone maybe a little bit over the top with this, but I'm just going to run through how this is done in this video. Now, this is not going to be the same format as most of my videos, partly because of the nature of capturing this, because I'm using OBS to capture my different sources and effectively rebroadcast them. Then capturing that is not something that I've got the equipment or, to be honest, the inclination to do at the moment. So it's going to be a little bit rough and ready. I don't want to spend 3 months editing this, etc. I'm just going to try and get this all done very quickly. So apologies in advance for any of the roughness, etc. I say it's going to be lots of different elements which I need to put together. So I've apologized enough. Let's just get into it. So just going to run you through what I use and then how to put those different elements together, and hopefully that will be useful to you. So here you can see a still of my desktop, which has got pretty much all the elements in question on it. Now, obviously, this is a 4K screen, which I use in my studio, so that may be a little small. So we're going to zoom in on those individual elements. And also, as I've mentioned before, I don't have the setup to allow me to capture that while I'm doing OBS as well. So this is necessarily this way. Now, first things first, let's take a look just at OBS in use. So the key to all of this working is a piece of software called OBS. I'm not going to proclaim that I'm an expert in this at all. I've just dabbled around the edges, but I found it really, really useful. I've also found it pretty easy to get into. So I watched a few videos, particularly on a channel which I'll link to in the description, Epos Vox. He's the stream professor, as he calls himself. Seems like a really nice guy. Also seems to really know his stuff. Watched a few of his tutorials and things about capture cards, etc., and basically got into this. So in short, OBS allows you to take a series of video sources, and with the current version of it, you can then rebroadcast that as a camera stream, so it appears as a fake camera. That means that you can just set Zoom, Teams, whatever you're using to use that fake camera, and then you can pick the feed that you're sending. So then you can change between different cameras, different views, screen captures, etc. And that's the kind of thing I'm using. So now I'm going to switch over to that and then go through just the scenes that I've got set up and how they work for me, and then just give you a bit of a brief run through on how to set that up. But say, A, I'm not an OBS expert, and B, there are far better resources available on how to do this. This is just a meta guide, as it were. So here you see OBS in action. So this screen here is the main screen of OBS, and as you can see, I've got a series of different sources set up in this particular scene, and we'll run through them. But firstly, I'm just going to run you through what would typically be used during the course of a lesson. So we start out on this first scene, which is just prior to the lesson starting, just so, if I want to take a drink or whatever, or I'm just making some notes, you don't get at the top of my head or whatever. And that's actually, we've also got an end one as well for exactly the same reason. So maybe there's a bit of dead time at the beginning and the end. The main views throughout the course of the lessons are this one. So this is the first one, a main one. It's just coming from my main webcam. Now, typically, I wouldn't have the mic here. I'd have it out of the way, so it's just not in the way of my face, because obviously facial expression, etc., is important, and being able to see people is as well. But I'm going to put it back to where it normally would be for doing a voiceover for these kind of videos. Then there are some other views as well. So I've got this 3-cam view, which allows me to use all 3 of the cameras I've got here. So you can see picking, etc. You can see fretting. So for instance, if you need to see in a bit of detail. Now, I need to move around a bit depending on where I am, but that's not a problem normally during the course of the lesson. You can normally find a position which is good. But also, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, I've also got my normal video, which I just moved over. So there's those three which have been put together there. Then we've got a PDF view. So here's the PDF view, which you saw earlier on. So this is a screen capture. So this just captures that screen directly. And if I change tabs or scroll, the only thing I've found with this is it's a bit annoying because it keeps putting this bar on, etc. because Adobe. But it's really useful to be able to do this. And once you get the hang of, zooming in, setting your window to the right thing and scrolling that, if you've got a pupil who maybe hasn't printed out the things that you've got, it's easy to put these on screen. If you're getting them to play a song, you can just be their page turner for them. So run through those chords, etc., that kind of thing, which works as a reasonable, sort of parallel of how you would do it in the real world. In addition, we've got the wide view plus the PDF. So if there's anything I want to explain, etc., then I can do that. This actually reacts to the window being resized, but I've generally found if it's too tall, then it means you've got problems when you're zoomed in. But that's just one of those things you play around with. I've also got fretting in PDF. So if we need to show a particular fretting of, let's say, like that arpeggio, which is on screen, so that kind of thing, so you can follow through with the two. They can see that while you are showing it on screen. So we'd probably zoom in, a bit more. So maybe just zoom in, and then they could see both that. So there's that first bar of that arpeggio, and then you can show them that and play it at the same time. Next up, just the fretting. So this is just the phone camera. So then you've got that. So again, if we needed to see anything in detail, you could see that really nicely there. So, and if you move to the right place, say I would typically just move there, and then they can see that nice and closely as you're going. And the same for picking. So we've got a camera here which allows you to see picking. So you can see, all those important things that Troy Grady's always reminding me that I got wrong for 20 years. So you can see all those things which are important there. And that's pretty much it as far as this is set up. Now, I have thought about adding extra camera angles and composites of them, etc. But I found that this has satisfied 90% of the things that I need to do. So I think anything else might be a bit of overkill. But certainly setting up OBS to do this has been reasonably straightforward. Say, I followed a few online tutorials, but it's fairly simple to do, and you can add scenes, and in addition, you can have collections of scenes. So I've got my guitar teaching one, but also I've got ones for screen captures for other things that I'm doing, etc. So you can just change those very quickly and then set those up. So let's say you were teaching guitar, but also you were teaching trumpet or something like that. You can have different things, different screens, and then all of those would work. Now, the link between Lua Macros and OBS, which we'll see later on, this is purely done by settings here. So all of these scenes are set up, and I put F1, F2, F3, etc. in there. But actually, if we look at settings here and hotkeys, so this is the important thing. And as you create scenes, they appear in your settings here. So we can see fretting plus PDF is Control, Alt, and num5, because that's what Lua Macros sends out. So when I press the number 5 on my keypad, it changes it to be Control, Alt, num5, as you'll see a bit later on. If you don't want to get into programming Lua Macros, you can just use the keyboard shortcuts that I've set up. So if you set it to be Control, Alt, num5, then it will work. And the reason I picked those is because that doesn't seem to conflict with anything else significant. I'm sure there's something that will do, but it's not the end of the world. So you can see that all those scenes, that's the only things that are set up there, and it just me allows to switch to those scenes whenever I want. But they're dead easy to set up because you just put in your key press and away you go. Once they're saved, you can just change as quickly as that. Just press between the two. You can see I've got a transition of 1300 milliseconds to go between them because I just felt that was a reasonably smooth fade. You can configure almost anything you want. There's so much you can do with OBS. As you can see, I've actually got the mixer set up, but here I'm not using this, but you can set this up. You can add VST effects to it, so you can do all sorts of really useful stuff with this, but that's not something that I've done too much with, purely because of my audio setup. But say OBS is fantastic, and it's not super complicated. It's super powerful, but it's pretty easy to do. You can see I'm recording here. Typically, that wouldn't be the case. That wouldn't be what you'd need to do. Now, here you can see we've got tools, we've got virtual camera, and that's it. And I've ticked auto start here. So every time I start OBS, the OBS camera starts working and is feeding whatever's coming out of this screen. So whatever's visible here is available to whichever video conferencing program you want. And that's it. So that's pretty much it for my OBS setup. So watch a few people's videos which are really about OBS, how to set it up, and you'll be golden within, an hour or so. You'll have this down and be able to really play around with it and get it set up exactly the way you want, which is probably the most important thing. So here I'm going to run you through how to add sources to scenes on OBS, which, while this isn't a full OBS tutorial, this is probably going to cover most of the things that you need for doing the kind of things we've been talking about. So just adding simple sources and then adding new scenes, etc. So here's a fresh copy of OBS, which has been installed on my Mac, so I can screen capture what I'm doing while I'm recording audio, etc., and running OBS. And I'm just going to add a couple of sources to a scene and then add a different scene so you can get the idea. So here we have a scene which has got a name there. We can rename it if we want just by right clicking, and I'm going to call this main camera. And then in the sources for this scene, I'm going to add a source. So I'm going to click plus and we get a list of the kind of things that OBS can take. And in this case, I'm going to add a video capture device, which is going to be the cameras. So I'm going to call it Mac Main Cam, because I haven't got any existing ones. And I'm going to click OK for that. And then we can pick it from the devices list here. So I'm going to pick the Mac's built-in FaceTime HD camera, which is not great. And you can see but there I am. Hello. So I'm just going to add that. And that gets added to this scene. Now we can move this around. I can click on that. So I can click and move it around. I can resize it with the handles at the side. You can see it's not quite the right aspect ratio for my Mac screen, but that probably won't be a problem if you're on a PC. But you can resize it, put it wherever you want, etc. So let's just do it like that. That will do. And then I'm going to lock this. So I click the lock, and now you can see I can't move it. So if I do anything ham-fisted or stupid, that's not going to be a problem. Next up, I'm going to add a new scene. So let's call this one something else. So let's call this Cams plus PDF. And when you do that, you can see we are now back to a blank screen and we can add a source. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a video capture device, which is going to be my camera. And you can see now the Mac main cam appears in there. So there's no point in duplicating. In fact, it can create problems if you do, in terms of setup and so on. So I'm just going to add that one in again. And there you can see, hello, there I am again. And I'm just going to move this one over this time. So size it differently. So even though it's the same source, you can place it differently in a scene. And now I'm going to add an extra camera. So another video capture device. And this time I'll call it HP Cam, because I've got the junky HP camera attached. Pick that from the list, the premium autofocus webcam, which you can see is doing a terrible job at the moment because it's really not a great webcam, but it is sort of usable. So there we go. And we can see that that's the wrong order. So we need to move this up. So it's in front of me, which I don't want. And particularly because it's got these black bars at the side, probably we could get around that with settings, but I'm just going to say, let's do that. And then we can move this one to the back. So moving that down, etc. We can play around with that as we want. So maybe we'd move this one over a bit, and that'll do. And the last thing I want to do is to add the capture of an application. So again, click this here, and I'm going to pick window capture, and I've already got Adobe Reader. So I'm just going to call this PDF Reader. So we've got these windows open, but we haven't got PDF. So we've got all these other things which are built in, and I'm just going to open a PDF. So let's just open up Adobe Reader, and there it is with arpeggio shapes there. So we've got that window there, and now we can go back to OBS, and there it appears at the top. For some reason it didn't appear straight away. And there we go. So there we've got that window capture, which we can hit OK. And you can see it's really high resolution because it's the max default screen resolution, which is large. So we can then move that around. This is exactly the process I went through to set up all my different views. So by resizing that, and also it would follow the resizing of the window appropriately, but I don't want to spend too much time on this. And obviously you'd need to fine tune this by fine tuning your window sizes, but you can see by doing those and then locking these, I've now got a scene, and then I'd switch between them using keyboard shortcut, using something like Lua Macros as seen before. So if we had that attached, we would go to settings, and you'll see that the cameras and PDF will appear here, and we just pick a shortcut to switch to scene. So I'll put one in. So you just click in there, and I'm going to do Alt, Command, and 1 for that. And then for main camera, Alt, Command, and squiggle, whatever that's called. And now I can switch between them by using those keyboard shortcuts, and we've got that set up. So if you were to just press, if you had Lua Macros running and to press the appropriate key on the keyboard, you wouldn't even need to know what the keyboard shortcuts were. It would just work for you. So you'd just be able to press that, and away you go. So that's a very quick, skipping over the details, introduction to how to set up OBS. You might find that that's enough, and if you're a bit adventurous, you'll probably find that's enough to be getting on with, and then you can get set up and you can start creating everything you need for this to work. For more detail, definitely there are plenty of tutorials on the internet generally and on YouTube specifically. So I'd suggest doing a bit of search for OBS tutorial, but while they're generally aimed towards streaming, you can take everything you need in terms of setting up different sources and scenes and being able to switch between them. There are loads of different features and modes that we've not even looked anywhere near at in this, because there's just so much to OBS. It's an immense piece of software, but it's really useful. So the last thing is this virtual camera. So we would click Start Virtual Camera. So by clicking that, that would now make the virtual camera available to zoom or whatever I have available on here, but I'm going to turn that off because, well, you can see we're only at 3% CPU load, but we're only at 18 FPS. So we need to play around with the settings. And certainly I found it's possibly not as good on the Mac as I found it on the PC. I found it to be absolutely rock solid and really low in terms of CPU use, but then I'm also capturing on this. And cameras obviously are what you need. And at the time when I first set this up, it was sort of peak supply crisis pandemic because everybody was trying to work online. There wasn't the supply of cameras and there was mega demand. So things such as my Logitech C920, which is up there, became a commodity item that was cost more than I paid for it months before. So, you know, everything became expensive. So I needed to work around that. So I had two workarounds. The first thing is I actually reused a really terrible old webcam that I've got. So the one that I use, the picking camera, is actually an old HP webcam that I just happened to have put in the cupboard and hadn't thrown away in one of my big clear outs, fortunately. The other one, which I felt needed better quality, was my old mobile phone. So there's a piece of software called DroidCam, which was £5, which allowed me to stream the camera over the network to it. So I could just turn the camera on, run DroidCam, and then stream that straight away. So that appears as another source from inside OBS. And then I picked those up. So in the 3-camera view that you saw earlier on, the main camera is my Logitech webcam. But in addition to that, the HP cam and the Droid cam on my old phone were being used as the other 2 camera views. So that can be a really useful way. And obviously, a lot of people have got an old mobile phone knocking around. And even if you haven't, they're fairly cheap. So at the time, it would have been cheaper to buy a second-hand mobile phone than it would to buy another webcam. I think supply is a bit better now, but you can still, you know, add a few extra cameras for not a lot of extra money by taking that route. Setting up DroidCam is pretty easy. It's really a case of installing it from the Play Store. So here you can see I've got DroidCam X. This is the sort of pro version. I can't remember what the limitations are, but I think it gives you more controls. You possibly can get by without it, but I thought, you should pay the developers, and he was saving me a lot of money, and it was like £5. So let's not worry too much about it. And it's literally just a case of running it here. You see the addresses put in. So it says browser IP cam access. And then you have to install the DroidCam client on your computer. So I've got that installed on Windows. So here you can see it's installed, and go to DroidCam and start. And this is what would normally come up anyway, but you just put in the address. So whatever the address is, the port's probably standard. Because I connect over Wi-Fi. You can connect over USB, but I didn't want to do that. I just connected over IP. I only ticked video. I didn't want audio. And you click start. And instantly, as soon as you do that, you'll see that on the Android thing, it swaps over to that. And now we're getting video, etc. And if I put that in place, then I get the correct video for what I'm interested in. So now that will be my fretboard camera. That will just be presented as a video source in OBS, and then you can place that wherever you want. Now, selecting between sources during the course of a lesson is something that you don't want to be fumbling around with your mouse, etc., that kind of thing. Now, you can get a really nice piece of equipment called a Stream Deck, which is fully programmable. It's got some nice little OLED screens under buttons, so you can make it really like a picture menu in a restaurant in Barcelona or something like that. But I didn't want to pay the money, to be honest. And also at the time, supply was pretty short. So instead of that, I used this. So this is a £10 wireless numeric keypad. It's pretty generic. Now, the issue with trying to use something like that is you need to translate the key presses on that to something else, because if you're just trying to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., that's not generally going to work well. Fortunately, there is a program called Lua Macros, which allows you to take any keyboard you've got plugged in and then translate it to different key presses. So the standard Windows system doesn't allow you to differentiate between keyboard 1 and keyboard 2 or whatever you've got plugged in, whereas Lua Macros can capture it at a lower level and then change the key presses that you're sending out. So it's a bit nerdy to program. What I've done is I've put a quick blog post on my site with the Lua Macros file that I use, which then means all you need to do is to set OBS up to use the keyboard shortcuts that I use, and then it'll pretty much just work. So I'll take you through just how I set that up and run it every time. And then there you go. You've got an equivalent. Now, I just got a cheap Dymo gun and just changed those so I didn't have to remember that number 1 is pre and number 9 is end, etc. But that's been so invaluable now, because whenever I want to change views, I just press the button and instantly we go to, close up of picking hand or close up of fretting hand, etc., or PDF, and you can juggle it as many ways as you want. So I've only done 9 views. You could easily get 15 out of this by just using all those keys, but actually, because you've got numlock mode and non-numlock mode, the 10 number keys can then go to another set. So you can get lots of functionality out of it, but I just wanted it to be one of those one-to-one relationships where when you press the button, it always does the thing that it says on the button, not, oh, I'm in mode 6 now, so I have to think about the number I thought about earlier on, etc., that kind of thing. So I wanted it to be quick and direct. And this has probably proved to be the best part of the whole thing, because when I want to change view, I literally can just do that. Depending on the camera angle, the pupil may not even see what I'm doing because my main camera doesn't show that, but I just switch from one to another seamlessly. We can go to viewing a PDF. We can go to whatever we want to see, and that works really well. So for the 12 quid it cost in total, worth every penny. So here you can see Lua Macros has been downloaded, and I just put this in a folder that I'm not going to delete and created a shortcut to it because it doesn't come with an installer. But once it's running, you should see this. And in this case, I'm just going to load up the pre-programmed macro, which I'd already created. So I'm just going to click here and then browse to it on my computer. It's just defaults to my documents. So we're just going to scroll down, find it. And there we are. So this is my entire macro. So it's not enormous. And to be honest, it's basically the same thing over and over again. So you've got this sort of boilerplate bit. So this is the bit that starts it. I called it Stream Deck just because I'm an idiot. It can be called anything. So you basically have to find this ID from the connected devices. So this is how you know that you're connected to the keypad rather than anything else. So that just takes a bit of research. And once you've got that, then you just pick this. So the first one is if a button is 13. So this is sending control and enter. So that character there means control. And then obviously that is enter. And then there's a bunch of else ifs. And then if the button is 97, then you send this. Now, if you want to find out what they are, they're actually pretty easy to do because if you haven't assigned them in this, so let's say this was all empty, you can just pick them by pressing the buttons on here. So if we press play on this, which you need to do every time. So every time I run Lua Macros, I will load up the appropriate macro and then I'll press play. And it finds all these devices. So you see a list of all these devices here. There's the ID there. So you can see that ID is F2D5061, and that's what's ended up in here. So that tells Lua Macros what to use. So that's this print devices does that. And you can see the others are unassigned. So I've only given that one, that name there. And so it says Stream Deck is this. So this is the USB ID, and then it says it's a keyboard. And if we've got any unassigned keys, you can see they come up. It says not yet assigned. So if I wanted to assign the pick, what's currently pick key, which is 8, but when it's not in that mode, then I would just do that. So numlock is 144, etc. So you can assign a lot of different things. You could make this much more complicated, but if you're scared by this, then just download my thing because you can see here this says basically that's key number 1, that's out, that's control, and that's num1. So it sends control out control num1, which is control out num1, same thing. And that's why that's set to that shortcut in OBS. And beyond that, there's just the same thing basically pretty much over and over again. So that's all there is. And this is what allows you to control this smoothly. Now, obviously, you can spend more money and buy a Stream Deck if you want, but I don't see the point. I'm quite happy with my £10 solution versus £130 solution. I mean, the Stream Deck would be cool, but it wouldn't help me teach any better. So Lua Macros is probably the most complicated part of the whole setup, but there is help available on the internet for it. It's kind of been abandoned, but to be honest, I think if you install it, download my macro and run it and just find your device using this and then put this code in there, then you'll be good to go because you can just use the keyboard shortcuts I've set up and that will be it. You'll be done. So I'd probably do that. If you're technically, a bit scared of this, that's the way to go. There is some help sort of splattered around the internet, although this has kind of been abandoned, but it's worked perfectly for me. It's never let me down. I know it says it's version 0.1.1, but this has never gone wrong at any point. It's been really good. So it's been a really worthwhile addition. So arranging all this was, as you can see on screen now, simply a case of cutting up a piece of plywood that I had and making a couple of brackets. So there's one to hold the mobile phone, which I spaced to give it the right angle to look down, and the other one just to hold the HP webcam in place. I put the other two main things, so the keypad and the volume control for my speakers there, and then I cut the corner off so I can put my Mac there. So the Mac in today's situation is actually recording the audio for this, but in the course of a normal lesson, it would be what I would be playing backing tracks because they go through my Helix, which I use, and then go out to the audio to the pupil in this case. That actually replicates my normal teaching setup. So normally when I'm teaching in person, I'll take the Helix, but I'll also take the MacBook. I put the audio through there because it's just easier to control the volume during the course of a lesson because then I can control the backing track volume with my foot to balance up with whatever the pupil's doing through their guitar amp. So it just makes life a little bit easier and also, replicates what I normally do. But again, it took half an hour to set up. But the reason this was really important is it means that every time I want to start teaching guitar lessons, all I have to do is put the bit of wood there and put all the jigsaw pieces on there, and I know everything's done and everything's in the right position, so I haven't got to reset cameras, this, that, and the other. It's just going to work. So when it comes to setting up your video software, that will be down to you. So in the case of Zoom, it's simply a case of going to settings and then video, and then choosing the OBS virtual camera. And then we're in business. In terms of audio, I actually do it slightly differently. So I've got an external sound card, which is exactly the same as seen in my using Cubase and Zoom video. So I just send audio to that, because then I've got control of with a mixer on screen. So that's slightly different. You may want to just feed it straight in, and OBS can mix your audio. I just chose not to do that for my own reasons. I could do it through there. The advantage of doing that is that then you can change audio with the scenes. So the one issue that I have with my setup is when I change scenes on my controller, the audio stays the same. The disadvantage of that is that if I want to keep quiet, I need to actually keep quiet. Or if I want to prepare something, I can't do that without making settings here. So at some point in the future, I might change that. But at the moment, I've got these two separate things. But that's a choice you can make. It will totally depend on your setup. So because I've got that already set up, it was the most expedient thing to do. And it just mimics what I was doing anyway when I'm using Cubase and this remotely, because I tend just to use the built-in features of that, because either I'm screen sharing or you get a video of me, and you get the video of me anyway with that. And there isn't so much cutting to other cameras. But if I'm in a situation where I need to do the kind of OBS things, then obviously I'll use OBS. So there you go, a brief overview of my remote teaching setup, which in my case is for teaching guitar, but would cover any instrumental and possibly other areas of teaching as well. As we've seen, the cost outlay doesn't have to be significant. So most of the equipment I already had, a few bits and pieces I needed to buy, a couple of bits of software. We're talking under 20 quid in total to take this from being just a single camera and not a very good end result for the people who, let's not forget, are paying our wages, to something where you can concentrate on the right things at the right time and give them the feeling that they are getting a well-presented lesson rather than just an ad hoc mess, which certainly I've seen in some cases has been the case. So I say this is not a typical video for me, but it's something that I thought was really important to put out, particularly because I think we're going to have a few months of this yet. And at the moment in the UK, at the time of recording this, all schools are closed, and they might be for a bit more time yet. And even when they're not, maybe instrumental visiting teaching isn't going to be the best thing to happen. So as ever, I hope you found this useful, even if it's a bit left field. Hope it's given you some ideas and there's some things you can research. And we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.